The military training ground fell silent. Seasoned snipers, men who had spent decades perfecting their craft, stood frozen behind their scopes. What they had just witnessed defied every rule of physics, every limitation of human capability, every assumption they had ever made about what was possible. 7,200 meters. That's 4.47 miles. That's the distance between downtown Manhattan and the Statue of Liberty. That's farther than most people can clearly see on a clear day, even with binoculars. And she had just put a single bullet through a target smaller than a dinner plate. The woman they had dismissed as too small, too young, too emotional had just shattered the world record for the longest confirmed sniper kill. But this isn't just a story about marksmanship. This is about a journey that began in a war-torn village where a little girl learned that sometimes, to protect the people you love, you have to become something the world never expected you could be. Her name would soon be whispered in military academies around the globe. Her technique would be studied by ballistics experts for generations. Her story would inspire thousands of young women to pick up rifles and prove that deadly precision knows no gender. But, on that day, as the echo of her impossible shot faded across the desert training ground, all anyone could do was stare at the girl who had just redefined the limits of human capability. This is her story. This is how an underestimated farm girl from a forgotten corner of the world became the most feared and respected sniper of her generation. Elena Vasquez grew up in the shadow of violence, but not in the way most people imagine. Her childhood home sat on the edge of a small farming community in northern Colombia, where the sound of distant gunfire was as common as roosters crowing at dawn. The year was 1995, and the country was torn apart by decades of conflict between government forces, paramilitary groups, and revolutionary fighters. At 8 years old, Elena was smaller than most children her age, with dark hair that her grandmother braided each morning and serious brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. While other kids played games in the dusty streets, Elena spent her afternoons helping her father, Miguel, tend to their small coffee plantation. Miguel had been a soldier once, before losing his left leg to a landmine, and he walked with a pronounced limp that never slowed him down. The Vasquez family lived simply but peacefully until the day the armed men came to their village. Elena remembered that morning clearly because it started like any other. She was feeding their 3 chickens behind the house when she heard her mother, Carmen, calling urgently from inside. Elena ran toward the house and saw her mother standing at the window, her face pale with fear. Down the dirt road that led to their home, a convoy of pickup trucks was approaching. Men with rifles stood in the truck beds, their faces covered with bandanas. Elena had seen similar groups before, but they had always passed through without stopping. This time was different. Miguel emerged from the house, moving as quickly as his injured leg would allow. He carried an old hunting rifle that Elena had seen him clean countless times but never fire. His hands were steady, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. Carmen gathered Elena and her younger brother, Carlos, close to her side. The truck stopped just outside their property line. Elena counted 12 men, all carrying automatic weapons that looked much newer and more dangerous than her father's old rifle. One man, clearly the leader, stepped forward. He was tall and thin, with a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. "Miguel Vasquez," the man called out. His voice carried across the yard with casual authority. "We know who you are. We know you used to wear a government uniform." Miguel stepped onto the front porch, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. Elena watched from the window as her father faced down the armed group. She had always thought of her father as the strongest man in the world, but seeing him stand alone against so many weapons made her realize how vulnerable they really were. "That was a long time ago," Miguel replied. His voice was calm, but Elena noticed the way his knuckles whitened around the rifle stock. "I'm just a farmer now. I have no part in anyone's war." The scarred man laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Unfortunately, that's not how this works. Your neighbors have been telling stories about a former government sniper living in their midst. Some people are nervous about having such a skilled marksman so close to their homes." Elena's breath caught. She had never heard anyone call her father a sniper before. She knew he had been a soldier, but the details of his service had always been kept from the children. Now, watching the fear in her mother's eyes, she began to understand that her father's past was more complicated than she had realized. "I told you, I'm out of that life," Miguel said. "I just want to raise my family in peace." The leader gestured to two of his men, who began walking toward the house. Elena felt her mother's hands tighten protectively around her shoulders. Carlos, who was only 5 years old, began to whimper softly. "Here's what's going to happen," the scarred man continued. "You're going to come with us. We have some work that requires your particular skills. Your family will be safe as long as you cooperate." Elena watched her father's face change. The resignation and fear disappeared, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. She had never seen this expression before, but somehow she recognized it instinctively. This was the face of the soldier he used to be. "No," Miguel said simply. The leader raised his eyebrows. "I don't think you understand the situation. We're not asking. And I'm not negotiating." Miguel's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone in the yard could hear him clearly. "You want to take me from my family? You want to force me back into killing? Then, you better be prepared to pay the price." What happened next would be burned into Elena's memory forever. Miguel raised his rifle with smooth, practiced motion that seemed almost lazy in its confidence. The scarred man was still reaching for his sidearm when Miguel's first shot rang out. The bullet struck the leader's center mass, dropping him instantly. Before the other men could react, Miguel had worked the bolt action and fired again. The second man fell with a bullet through his throat. The remaining fighters scattered, some diving behind the trucks, others returning fire wildly. Elena watched in stunned silence as her father moved with deadly precision around the yard, using trees and outbuildings for cover. His limp seemed to disappear entirely, replaced by the fluid movements of a trained warrior. Every shot he fired found its target. When men tried to flank him from the left, he anticipated their movement and was waiting with his rifle already aimed. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. When the dust settled, 8 men lay dead in the dirt around the Vasquez property. The survivors had fled in the remaining trucks, leaving their weapons and their wounded behind. Miguel walked back to the house, his rifle smoking in the afternoon heat. Elena saw that he was bleeding from a graze across his left arm, but his expression was calm and sad rather than triumphant. Carmen ran to him, checking his wound while tears streamed down her face. "Pack everything," Miguel said quietly. "We have to leave. Tonight." Elena didn't understand why they had to run when her father had won the fight, but she obeyed without question. As she gathered her few possessions into a small bag, she found herself thinking about the way her father had moved during the battle. There had been something beautiful and terrible about his precision, something that spoke to a deeper truth about protection and family and the prices people pay to keep their loved ones safe. That night, as they traveled by bus toward the capital city of Bogota, Elena asked her father to tell her about being a sniper. Miguel was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the dark countryside rolling past. "It's not something I'm proud of," he finally said. "But sometimes, when people you love are in danger, you have to be willing to do things that change you forever. The most important thing is making sure your reasons are pure." Elena nodded, not fully understanding but sensing the weight of his words. She fell asleep against her mother's shoulder, dreaming of her father moving like a ghost through the coffee plants, his rifle an extension of his will. They arrived in Bogota as refugees, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and Miguel's hunting rifle. The city was overwhelming after their quiet farm life, full of noise and traffic and millions of strangers. They found shelter in a crowded neighborhood where displaced families like theirs tried to rebuild their lives away from the violence. Miguel found work in a factory that manufactured car parts. The pay was low, and the work was hard on his damaged leg, but it was honest and safe. Carmen cleaned houses for wealthy families in the northern part of the city. Elena and Carlos enrolled in a public school where the other children sometimes made fun of their country accents and worn clothes. For 2 years, they lived quietly and carefully, trying to blend in and avoid attention. Miguel never spoke about his past, and Elena learned not to ask questions about the hunting rifle he kept cleaned and oiled but never touched. She focused on her studies and tried to help her mother with household tasks, but she found herself drawn again and again to memories of that afternoon when her father had protected them with impossible skill and deadly precision. Elena's life changed again when she turned 11. Their neighborhood was plagued by a gang that controlled several blocks around their apartment building. The gang members were mostly teenagers who had grown up in the city's slums, and they demanded protection money from local businesses and families. Most people paid without complaint, understanding that resistance could bring terrible consequences. But Elena watched the fear in her neighbor's eyes and remembered the way her father had stood alone against 12 armed men. She began to wonder if there might be other ways to solve problems besides submission and payment. The opportunity came when she witnessed 3 gang members cornering an elderly man who sold newspapers on the corner near their building. The old man, whose name was Senor Martinez, had always been kind to Elena, sometimes giving her free newspapers to practice her reading. Now he was being beaten because he couldn't afford the gang's latest demands. Elena ran home and found her father cleaning his rifle, something he did every Sunday morning out of habit. She told him what was happening to Senor Martinez. Miguel listened carefully, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Papa," Elena said when she finished her story. "Will you teach me to shoot?" Miguel looked at his daughter for a long moment. She was still small for her age, but there was something in her eyes that reminded him of himself at that age. A willingness to stand up for people who couldn't protect themselves. "Why do you want to learn?" he asked. "Because someone has to help Senor Martinez," Elena replied. "And because I think I might be good at it." Miguel studied her face, searching for signs of bloodlust or anger. Instead, he saw determination and compassion, the same qualities that had once driven him to join the army to protect his country. After a long pause, he nodded. "Every Sunday morning," he said. "We'll take the bus to the mountains outside the city. But you have to understand that once you learn this skill, you'll carry the responsibility forever. A rifle is not a toy, and killing is not a game." Elena nodded solemnly. "I understand, Papa." Their first lesson took place the following Sunday in a remote valley 2 hours outside Bogota. Miguel had brought a box of ammunition and several empty cans for targets. He showed Elena how to hold the rifle properly, how to control her breathing, how to sight down the barrel and squeeze the trigger smoothly. Elena's first shot missed the target completely, the bullet disappearing harmlessly into the hillside. Miguel expected this. What he didn't expect was how quickly she learned to adjust. By her third shot, she was hitting the cans consistently. By the end of their first session, she was grouping her shots within a circle smaller than her fist. Miguel had trained dozens of soldiers during his years in the army. He had seen men with natural talent and men who struggled for months to achieve basic competency. But he had never seen anyone learn as quickly as his 11-year-old daughter. "How does it feel?" he asked as they packed up their equipment. Elena considered the question seriously. "Like I was meant to do this," she replied. "Like the rifle is part of me." Miguel felt a chill run down his spine. Those were almost exactly the words he had spoken to his first instructor many years ago. He wondered if he was making a terrible mistake, passing on skills that had brought him so much pain and loss. But the following week, when Elena used her new abilities to drive off the gang members threatening Senor Martinez, Miguel knew he had made the right choice. Elena didn't kill anyone. She didn't even wound them. She simply demonstrated, with a few precisely placed shots, that their neighborhood was now under the protection of someone who could reach out and touch them from distances they couldn't even see. The gang members never returned to their block. Senor Martinez continued selling his newspapers in peace. And Elena began to understand the true power of a rifle in the hands of someone who knew how to use it not just to kill, but to protect. Elena's reputation grew quietly through the neighborhoods of southern Bogota. Word spread in whispers among shopkeepers and mothers and old men who gathered in the parks to play dominoes. There was a girl, they said, who could shoot like her father once did. A girl who used her skills not for money or revenge, but simply to keep decent people safe. By the time Elena turned 13, she had outgrown her father's hunting rifle. The old weapon had served them well, but Elena's natural abilities demanded something more precise, more powerful. Miguel had been saving money for months, skipping meals and working overtime at the factory to buy his daughter a proper rifle. The weapon he finally brought home was a Remington 700, used but well-maintained, with a scope that had been crafted by a master optician in Germany. Elena held the rifle for the first time and immediately felt the difference. The balance was perfect, the action smooth as silk, the trigger responsive to the slightest pressure. This rifle can reach out to 800 meters in the right hands, Miguel told her. Maybe further, if the shooter knows what she's doing. Elena nodded, running her fingers along the polished stock. She could already imagine the trajectories, the wind calculations, the mathematical precision required to place shots at such distances. The thought excited her more than anything she had ever experienced. Their training sessions became more sophisticated. Miguel taught Elena about wind speed and direction, about how humidity and altitude affected bullet flight, about the way heat waves rising from pavement could distort a target at long range. He showed her how to calculate the drop of a bullet over various distances, how to compensate for the rotation of the earth itself when making extremely long shots. Elena absorbed every lesson with frightening intensity. She practiced her breathing exercises every night before bed. She memorized ballistics tables until she could recite them in her sleep. She spent hours studying the flight patterns of birds, learning to read wind patterns from the way leaves moved in trees hundreds of meters away. But Miguel also taught her about restraint. About the difference between showing force and using it. About the responsibility that came with the ability to take life from distances where your target couldn't even see you. Anyone can learn to hit a target, Miguel told her during one of their mountain sessions. But it takes wisdom to know when not to pull the trigger. The most important shots are the ones you choose not to take. Elena's skills were put to the test when she turned 14. A new gang had moved into their neighborhood, more organized and violent than the previous one. These weren't local teenagers looking for pocket money. They were connected to larger criminal organizations, and they brought military-grade weapons and a willingness to use them against anyone who resisted their control. The gang's leader was a man named Roberto Cortez, known on the streets as El Tiburón, the Shark. Cortez had served in the army before deserting to join the criminal world, and he understood the value of fear and intimidation. His men carried automatic rifles and wore body armor. They moved through the neighborhood like an occupying army. Elena watched from her apartment window as Cortez and his men systematically took control of their streets. They demanded tribute from every business, recruited young boys as lookouts and drug runners, and established a network of safe houses throughout the area. Anyone who complained or resisted was beaten publicly as an example to others. The situation became personal when Cortez decided that Elena's mother, Carmen, was attractive enough to deserve his attention. He began following her home from work, making crude comments and demands that she meet him for dinner. Carmen tried to avoid him, changing her routes and schedules, but Cortez was persistent and patient. Miguel wanted to confront Cortez directly, but Elena convinced him to wait. She had been studying the gang's patterns for weeks, noting their movements and identifying their vulnerabilities. She had a better plan. Elena's opportunity came on a Thursday evening when Cortez was conducting business on a rooftop 3 blocks from their apartment. The distance was just over 400 meters, well within her range, but challenging enough to require all her skills. More importantly, the angle would allow her to make a statement without taking a life. Elena positioned herself on the roof of their apartment building, using a makeshift rest constructed from sandbags and wooden boards. She had studied this shot for days, accounting for wind patterns, the movement of the sun, and the precise timing of Cortez's routine meetings. Through her scope, Elena could see Cortez clearly as he stood with 2 of his lieutenants, counting money and discussing territory. He was wearing an expensive leather jacket and gold jewelry that glinted in the late afternoon sun. His confidence was obvious in the casual way he gestured, completely unaware that he was being watched by someone with the skill to reach him from this distance. Elena adjusted her scope for the precise range, compensated for a slight crosswind coming from the east, and steadied her breathing. Her finger found the trigger, and she felt the familiar calm that always preceded her best shots. In this moment, she was no longer a 14-year-old girl worried about her mother's safety. She was pure precision, a conduit for mathematical perfection. But, instead of aiming for Cortez himself, Elena shifted her point of aim to a thick glass bottle sitting on the parapet next to him. It would be a difficult shot. The bottle was less than 6 inches tall and, perhaps 3 inches wide. Missing would mean revealing her position for no gain. But, hitting it would send a message that couldn't be ignored. Elena squeezed the trigger with smooth, steady pressure. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she worked the bolt action immediately to chamber a fresh round. Through her scope, she saw the bottle explode in a shower of glass fragments, the pieces catching the sunlight as they fell toward the street below. Cortez and his men dove for cover, their weapons drawn and their heads swiveling as they tried to identify the source of the shot. Elena remained perfectly still, watching through her scope as the three men crouched behind the rooftop's low wall. She could see the confusion and fear in their faces as they realized that someone had just demonstrated the ability to reach them from an impossible distance. After several minutes, when no follow-up shots came, Cortez slowly raised his head above the wall. Elena was ready. Her second shot shattered another bottle sitting 10 feet away from the first, and this time Cortez got a clear look at the direction the bullet had come from. Elena knew that Cortez would understand the message. Someone in this neighborhood possessed the skill and equipment to reach him wherever he went. Someone was watching him, calculating angles and distances, ready to act if he crossed certain lines. The bottles were a warning, but they were also a demonstration of capability that no professional soldier could ignore. The third shot came as Cortez was pointing in Elena's direction, apparently trying to explain to his men where the shots were coming from. Elena placed this bullet through the center of a metal sign advertising cigarettes, the impact creating a perfectly round hole that would be visible from the street below. The message was clear: precision like this didn't happen by accident. Cortez and his men abandoned the rooftop within minutes, leaving behind their money and their dignity. Elena watched them flee through her scope, noting the way they moved, heads down, staying close to walls, constantly checking windows and rooftops for signs of additional threats. That night, Elena received an unexpected visitor. Cortez came to their apartment alone, without weapons, his hands visible and his manner respectful. Miguel answered the door with his own rifle ready, but Cortez made no threatening moves. "I want to speak with your daughter," Cortez said. Miguel's expression darkened. "My daughter is not available for conversation with men like you." "Please," Cortez continued. "I'm not here to threaten anyone. I just want to understand what happened today." Elena appeared in the doorway beside her father. Even though she was small for her age, there was something in her presence that commanded respect. Cortez looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "You made those shots," he said. "It wasn't a question." Elena nodded. "I did. 400 meters, with a crosswind, hitting targets the size of my fist." Cortez shook his head in amazement. "I've seen military snipers who couldn't make those shots consistently." "What do you want?" Elena asked. "I want to make a deal," Cortez replied. "You leave me and my business alone, and I'll make sure your family is protected. I'll even pay you for your services if you're interested in working together." Elena studied Cortez's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden threats. She saw neither. Instead, she saw something that surprised her: genuine respect. "I'm not interested in your money," Elena said. "But I am interested in an agreement. You can conduct your business in this neighborhood, but you leave the decent people alone. No more demanding tribute from small shop owners. No more recruiting children. And you stay away from my mother." Cortez considered the proposal. Elena's demonstration that afternoon had proven that she possessed the skill to make his life extremely difficult, possibly even to end it entirely. At the same time, her restraint in choosing non-lethal targets suggested that she might be reasonable to work with. "What about competing gangs?" Cortez asked. "If they move into this territory, will you help defend it?" "If they threaten innocent people, I'll deal with them the same way I would deal with you if you break our agreement," Elena replied. Cortez extended his hand. You have a deal. Elena shook his hand, and Miguel watched in amazement as his teenage daughter negotiated a peace treaty with one of the most dangerous men in their neighborhood. It was the first time he had seen anyone treat Elena as an equal in matters of violence and power, and he realized that his daughter had crossed a threshold that he hadn't even noticed. The agreement held for almost 2 years. Cortés kept his word, focusing his criminal activities on territory outside their neighborhood and treating local residents with grudging respect. Elena continued her training with her father, pushing the boundaries of distance and precision with each session. But Elena's reputation was spreading beyond their small corner of Bogotá. Stories traveled through the underground networks that connected Colombia's various armed groups. There was a girl, they said, who could shoot like a ghost, who could reach out and touch people from distances that defied belief. Some of the stories were exaggerated, but enough of them were true to attract attention from people who valued such skills. The attention came in the form of an army recruiter named Captain Luis Herrera. Herrera was responsible for identifying and recruiting exceptional marksmen for Colombia's elite counter-sniper units. He had heard enough stories about Elena to make the trip to Bogotá personally. Herrera's first meeting with the Vasquez family was awkward. He arrived at their apartment wearing his dress uniform, accompanied by 2 junior officers, and requested permission to speak with Elena about military service. Miguel was immediately suspicious, remembering his own recruitment decades earlier and the path it had led him down. "She's only 16, Miguel said. "Still a child." "With respect, sir," Herrera replied, "children don't make the kind of shots we've heard about. If even half the stories are true, your daughter possesses abilities that could save lives on a national level." Elena listened to the conversation from the kitchen, where she was helping her mother prepare dinner. She had been expecting something like this for months, ever since her reputation had begun spreading beyond their neighborhood. The question was whether military service would give her opportunities to use her skills for purposes that aligned with her values. "What exactly are you offering?" Elena asked, entering the living room. Herrera studied her carefully. Elena had grown taller over the past 2 years, but she still looked younger than her age. Her serious expression and direct manner of speaking, however, suggested maturity beyond her years. "Advanced training with the best instructors in Latin America," Herrera said. "Access to equipment that civilian shooters never see. The opportunity to serve your country and protect people on a scale much larger than this neighborhood. And, in return? A commitment to serve for at least 4 years, with the possibility of specialized assignments that would make use of your particular talents." Miguel started to object, but Elena held up her hand. She had already made her decision. "I want to see the training facility first," Elena said. "And I want guarantees about the types of missions I would be assigned to. I'm not interested in becoming an assassin." Herrera smiled. "I think we can arrange something mutually beneficial." 3 weeks later, Elena found herself at a military training facility hidden in the mountains 2 hours north of Bogotá. The base was designed specifically for training elite marksmen, with shooting ranges that extended to distances Elena had only dreamed about. Her instructor was a master sergeant named Ricardo Paz, a veteran sniper who had served in conflicts around the world. Paz had trained dozens of military snipers, but he had never worked with anyone who learned as quickly as Elena. "Forget everything you think you know about shooting," Paz told Elena on her first day. "Your father taught you well, but military sniping is different from neighborhood protection. We're going to push your abilities to distances and conditions you've never imagined." Elena's training began with weapons she had never seen before. Precision rifles chambered in calibers designed for extreme long-range shooting. Scopes with magnification levels that made distant targets appear close enough to touch. Ammunition crafted to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. But the equipment was only part of the training. Paz taught Elena about camouflage and concealment, about moving undetected through hostile territory, about surviving alone for days at a time while waiting for the perfect shot. She learned to calculate wind speed by watching grass move, to estimate range by studying the heat shimmer rising from distant objects, to control her heartbeat and breathing until she could fire between heartbeats. The most challenging part of the training involved shooting at distances beyond anything Elena had attempted before. The longest shot she had made in her civilian life was just over 600 meters. At the military facility, the ranges extended to 1,500 meters and beyond. At these distances, Elena had to account for factors she had never considered before. The rotation of the Earth became a significant variable in her calculations. The curvature of the Earth's surface meant that her bullets actually traveled in an arc through space rather than a straight line. Temperature differences between her position and the target could affect bullet flight in ways that required complex mathematical adjustments. Elena struggled with these extreme distances at first, but her natural abilities and relentless practice gradually yielded results. After 3 months of training, she was consistently hitting targets at 1,200 meters. After 6 months, she was placing shots accurately at 1,500 meters in challenging wind conditions. Paz began to realize that he was training someone truly exceptional. Elena's ability to process multiple variables simultaneously, to make instinctive adjustments for conditions she couldn't directly measure, to maintain precise muscle control under stress, these qualities were found in perhaps one marksman in 10,000. "I've never seen anything like this," Paz confided to Captain Herrera during one of his weekly reports. "She's not just gifted. She's operating on a level that most professional snipers never reach, even after years of combat experience." Elena's first field assignment came during her 8th month of training. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-ranking member of a revolutionary group was planning to meet with foreign weapons suppliers in a remote valley near the Venezuelan border. The meeting was scheduled to take place in an area that was difficult to approach undetected, making it perfect for a long-range interdiction. Elena's mission was to observe and report, with authorization to take action only if the targets presented an immediate threat to civilian populations. She would be working alone, positioned on a ridge overlooking the meeting site from a distance of approximately 1,100 meters. Elena spent 2 days moving into position, traveling at night and hiding during daylight hours to avoid detection. She carried her rifle in pieces, assembling it only when she reached her final firing position. Her equipment included enough food and water for a week, though she expected the mission to last no more than 3 days. The meeting took place exactly as intelligence had predicted. Elena watched through her scope as vehicles arrived at the remote farm building where the exchange was scheduled to occur. She could clearly identify the revolutionary leader from photographs she had studied, and she observed the weapons being transferred from the suppliers' trucks. Elena's orders were to photograph the exchange and identify as many participants as possible. She had no authorization to engage unless the situation changed dramatically. But, as she watched the meeting through her scope, Elena realized that something was going wrong. The weapons being transferred were not the small arms and ammunition that intelligence had predicted. Instead, Elena was watching the delivery of shoulder-fired missiles and military explosives. Weapons designed specifically for attacking civilian targets like schools, hospitals, and shopping centers. Elena photographed everything, but she also began calculating firing solutions for the key participants. If these weapons reached their intended targets, hundreds of innocent people would die. Her orders were clear, but her conscience was equally clear about what needed to happen. The decision point came when Elena observed the revolutionary leader testing one of the missiles, apparently planning to use it immediately against a target that had not been specified in the intelligence briefing. Elena made a choice that would define the rest of her career. Her first shot took the missile launcher out of the revolutionary leader's hands, destroying the weapon without harming the man holding it. Her second shot disabled the truck containing the remaining missiles, rendering them unusable. Her third shot was placed precisely between the feet of the weapons supplier, close enough to demonstrate that she could have killed him easily but chose not to. The chaos that followed gave government forces time to move in and arrest everyone at the meeting site. No one was killed, but a significant terrorist operation was disrupted and a cache of dangerous weapons was secured. Elena's after-action report was read at the highest levels of the Colombian military. Her decision to exceed her orders by taking action potentially saved hundreds of civilian lives, but it also demonstrated an independence of judgment that made some commanders nervous. Captain Herrera defended Elena's actions, pointing out that field conditions often required split-second decisions that couldn't be anticipated in mission briefings. But, the incident marked Elena as someone who would follow her conscience even when it conflicted with direct orders. She did the right thing, Herrera told his superiors. But, she's never going to be the kind of soldier who follows orders blindly. We need to decide whether that's a problem or an asset. The military decided it was an asset. Elena's combination of exceptional skill and moral clarity made her perfect for the most sensitive operations, assignments where the difference between justice and murder often came down to the judgment of the person behind the rifle. But, Elena was beginning to realize that her abilities were taking her toward challenges she had never imagined. Her training was complete, but her education in the true power and responsibility of precision shooting was just beginning. Elena's reputation within the Colombian military grew quietly but steadily. By the time she turned 18, she had completed 7 operational assignments, each one pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible in long-range precision shooting. Her longest confirmed kill stood at 1,847 meters, a shot that had eliminated a terrorist leader who was planning to bomb a school in Medellin. But, it was her restraint, not her lethality, that truly distinguished Elena from other military snipers. In a profession where success was traditionally measured in confirmed kills, Elena had developed a different metric: problems solved with the minimum necessary force. She had prevented more terrorist attacks through carefully placed demonstration shots than most snipers achieved through lethal force. This unusual approach brought Elena to the attention of international military observers. Representatives from American, British, and Israeli special forces had attended briefings about her techniques, and several foreign militaries had requested that Elena assist with training their own sniper programs. Elena's first international assignment came when she was invited to participate in a joint training exercise with British SAS forces in Scotland. The exercise was designed to test long-range shooting capabilities under challenging weather conditions, with participants from 12 different countries competing in various precision shooting scenarios. Elena arrived at the training facility near Stirling to find herself surrounded by some of the most skilled marksmen in the world. Men and women who had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflict zones. Veterans with decades of experience and training with equipment that represented the cutting edge of military technology. She was also the youngest participant by more than 5 years, and one of only 3 women in the entire program. The other participants were polite but clearly skeptical about what an 18-year-old from Colombia could contribute to a gathering of elite international warriors. Elena's first challenge came during the initial equipment inspection. Each participant was allowed to bring their preferred rifle and scope combination, and most had arrived with weapons worth more than Elena's family had earned in several years. Custom-built rifles with barrels crafted by master gunsmiths, scopes with electronics that could calculate wind speed and temperature automatically, ammunition hand-loaded to specifications measured in thousandths of an inch. Elena's rifle looked almost primitive by comparison. Her Remington 700 was well maintained but clearly showed signs of heavy use. Her scope was excellent but lacked the advanced features that most other participants considered essential. Her ammunition was military issue rather than custom-crafted. Interesting equipment choice, commented Sergeant Major William Morrison, a British SAS veteran who had served as a sniper instructor for more than 20 years. His tone was polite but carried an undertone of condescension. "It works for what I need," Elena replied simply. Morrison studied Elena's rifle more closely, noting the modifications that had been made to improve its accuracy and reliability. Despite its humble appearance, the weapon showed signs of being maintained and adjusted by someone who understood precision shooting at the highest levels. "What's your longest confirmed shot?" Morrison asked. 1847 meters, Elena replied. Morrison raised an eyebrow. That distance would put Elena among the top 5 snipers in the world for confirmed long-range kills. If she was telling the truth. Under what conditions? Mountain terrain, crosswind gusting to 15 knots, target moving at approximately walking speed. Morrison's skepticism increased. The scenario Elena described would have been challenging for even the most experienced snipers, particularly with the relatively basic equipment she was using. The first day of training focused on precision shooting at known distances under ideal conditions. Participants took turns engaging targets at ranges from 600 to 1200 meters, with scoring based on accuracy and consistency. Elena waited until she was called, observing the techniques and equipment of the other participants. When her turn came, Elena approached the firing line with her characteristic calm focus. She adjusted her rifle's position on the sandbags, studied the wind flags positioned along the range, and began her breathing routine. The target was positioned at 1,000 meters, well within her comfort zone. Elena's first shot struck dead center. Her second shot hit so close to the first that the impacts were nearly indistinguishable through the spotting scope. Her third shot completed a group that could have been covered by a coin. Morrison watched through binoculars, his expression changing from skepticism to intense interest. He had seen thousands of precision shooters over his career, and Elena's performance was in the top 1% of anything he had witnessed. "Bloody hell," muttered Corporal James Patterson, a Canadian sniper who had been watching Elena's shooting. "She's not even using wind meters or ballistic calculators. How is she making those calculations?" Elena overheard the comment and smiled slightly. "I don't need to calculate wind speed if I can see what it's doing to the grass and leaves. The mathematics becomes instinctive after enough practice." The second day of training involved shooting at unknown distances under challenging weather conditions. The Scottish Highlands provided plenty of both, with ranges that varied from 400 to 1,600 meters and weather that included rain, fog, and gusting winds that could change direction without warning. Elena excelled in these conditions. Her ability to read environmental factors that other shooters couldn't even detect gave her significant advantages when precision instruments weren't available or reliable. While other participants struggled to adjust for rapidly changing wind conditions, Elena seemed to anticipate the changes before they occurred. "She's reading the environment like a book," Morrison observed to his assistant instructor. "I've seen Aboriginal hunters in Australia who could track animals through terrain that looked empty to me, but I've never seen anyone read atmospheric conditions with that level of instinctive accuracy." The third day brought the most challenging test, extreme long-range shooting at distances beyond anything most of the participants had attempted before. The ranges extended to 2,000 meters and beyond, with targets that were barely visible even through high-powered scopes. Elena had never attempted shots at these distances before, but she approached the challenge with the same methodical precision that characterized all her shooting. She studied the terrain between her position and the targets, noting elevation changes and potential wind patterns. She observed how heat waves rising from the valley floor might affect her bullet's trajectory. She calculated the additional drop that would occur over these extended distances. Her first shot at 2,000 meters missed the target entirely. Elena worked the bolt and chambered a fresh round, making mental adjustments for what she had learned from the miss. Her second shot struck the target but, while outside the scoring rings. Elena paused, closing her eyes and visualizing the bullet's flight path through the air. She was dealing with factors she had never encountered before, distances so great that the Earth's rotation became a significant variable in her calculations. She opened her eyes and made several small adjustments to her scope settings. Her third shot struck the center of the 2,000-meter target. Morrison lowered his binoculars and stared at Elena. He had just witnessed something that challenged his understanding of what was physically possible. A shot of that precision at that distance, made with relatively basic equipment by someone who had never attempted such a distance before, simply shouldn't have been achievable. "How?" Morrison asked. Elena considered the question seriously. "I think about where the bullet needs to go, and then, I trust my body to put it there. The mathematics and the mechanics have to become automatic, so that the conscious mind is free to focus on factors that can't be calculated." Morrison had heard similar descriptions from other exceptional marksmen, but he had never seen the philosophy implemented with such stunning effectiveness. Elena wasn't just a skilled shooter. She was operating on a level that transcended technical proficiency and entered the realm of pure instinct. The final test involved engaging multiple targets at varying ranges in a time-limited scenario designed to simulate combat conditions. Participants had to identify and engage 5 targets positioned at distances ranging from 800 to 1,800 meters, with only 10 minutes to complete the entire sequence. Most participants used the full 10 minutes, taking time to precisely calculate each shot and confirm their hits before moving to the next target. Elena completed the sequence in 6 minutes and 43 seconds, with all 5 targets down and all shots placed in the scoring zones. "That's not possible," whispered Captain Sarah Chen, a sniper instructor from the United States Army. "Even if she's superhuman, she can't process ballistic calculations that quickly." Morrison had been thinking the same thing. He approached Elena as she was cleaning her rifle after the exercise. "Walk me through your process for that last drill," he requested. Elena looked up from her rifle. "I studied all 5 targets while other people were shooting, calculating the solutions in advance. When my turn came, I just had to execute shots I had already planned." "But, you couldn't have known the exact wind conditions until you were actually shooting," Morrison pointed out. "Wind conditions don't change that dramatically over 6 minutes," Elena replied. "And small variations can be compensated for instinctively if you're paying attention to the right environmental cues." Morrison shook his head in amazement. Elena wasn't just exceptionally skilled. She was approaching precision shooting with a level of strategic thinking and environmental awareness that most professional snipers never developed. The training exercise concluded with Elena ranking first overall among all participants. Her scores in precision, speed, and environmental adaptation were significantly higher than anyone else in the program. Morrison's final report described her performance as the most exceptional demonstration of marksmanship ability he had witnessed in more than 2 decades of training elite military snipers. But, for Elena, the real value of the Scottish training had been the opportunity to test her abilities against world-class competition and to learn that her instinctive approach to precision shooting was not only effective but superior to more traditional technical methods. Elena returned to Colombia with new confidence and a growing reputation that extended far beyond her own military. Stories about the young sniper who had dominated an international training exercise began circulating through military communities around the world. Foreign governments began requesting her assistance with specific operations that required the kind of precision she had demonstrated in Scotland. Elena's first international operational assignment came 6 months later. Intelligence services had identified a terrorist leader who was planning to use a truck bomb against a civilian target in Afghanistan. The terrorist was scheduled to meet with bomb makers in a remote compound that was heavily defended and difficult to approach undetected. Traditional military assault would have resulted in significant casualties among both attackers and innocent civilians in the area. Airstrikes were ruled out because of the risk of civilian casualties. The only viable option was a precision strike by a sniper positioned at extreme range, beyond the effective distance of the compound's defensive weapons. Elena was chosen for the mission because intelligence indicated that the shot would need to be made from a distance of approximately 2,400 meters. This was beyond the proven capabilities of any other sniper available to NATO forces, but it was within the theoretical range Elena had demonstrated during training exercises. Elena spent 2 weeks studying satellite photographs and intelligence reports about the target area. The terrain was mountainous and barren, offering few opportunities for concealment but excellent sightlines across the valleys where the compound was located. Weather conditions would be challenging, with high winds and dramatic temperature variations between day and night. Elena's insertion into Afghanistan was handled by British SAS forces who specializing in deep reconnaissance missions. She was transported by helicopter to a position 15 kilometers from her target, then moved on foot through terrain that offered no protection from observation except careful movement during darkness. It took Elena 3 days to reach her firing position, moving only at night and remaining completely hidden during daylight hours. She carried her rifle broken down into components, along with enough food and water for a week-long mission. Her equipment also included a satellite communication device that would allow her to coordinate with extraction forces. Elena's final firing position was a natural rock formation that provided both concealment and a stable platform for long-range shooting. The distance to the target compound was 2,387 meters, further than she had ever attempted an operational shot, but well within the range she had practiced during training. Elena spent her first day in position studying the target area through her scope, noting wind patterns and identifying the specific building where intelligence indicated the meeting would take place. She observed the daily routines of the compound's defenders, learning their patrol schedules and identifying blind spots in their surveillance. The terrorist leader arrived on the second day, transported in a convoy of vehicles that approached the compound from the north. Elena watched through her scope as he entered the building where the meeting was scheduled to occur. Now she had to wait for the moment when he would be clearly visible for a shot. The opportunity came late in the afternoon when the terrorist emerged from the building to inspect bomb-making materials that had been delivered earlier in the day. Elena had been tracking wind conditions for hours, noting subtle changes in direction and intensity that would affect her bullet's flight path. Elena made her final calculations, accounting for the 2,387-meter distance, the crosswind coming from the southwest, the elevation difference between her position and the target, and even the rotation of the Earth during the bullet's time of flight. All of these factors had to be processed instinctively and integrated into her muscle memory for the shot. Elena controlled her breathing and felt her heartbeat slow to the relaxed rhythm that always preceded her best shooting. Through her scope, she could see the terrorist clearly as he gestured to his subordinates, completely unaware that he was being observed from nearly 2.5 kilometers away. Elena squeezed the trigger with the smooth, steady pressure that had become as natural as breathing. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she immediately worked the bolt action to chamber a fresh round in case a follow-up shot was necessary. Through her scope, Elena watched the terrorist collapse. The shot had struck him precisely where she had aimed, instantly ending his threat to innocent civilians. The guards around him scrambled for cover, searching frantically for a threat they couldn't see and couldn't comprehend. Elena's satellite communication device crackled to life. Bravo 2, this is Control. Target down. Confirm successful engagement. Control, this is Bravo 2. Target eliminated. Successful engagement at 2,387 meters. There was a long pause before the response came. Bravo 2, confirm distance. Did you say 2,387 meters? Confirmed, Control. 2,387 meters. Elena's shot had shattered the previous world record for longest confirmed sniper kill by more than 400 meters. But, more importantly, it had eliminated a terrorist threat without risking any other lives, military or civilian. Elena's extraction was completed without incident 2 days later. Her after-action report was classified at the highest levels, but news of her achievement spread quickly through military sniper communities around the world. The young woman from Colombia had not only broken a record that many experts believed was unbreakable, but she had done so under operational conditions that made the accomplishment even more remarkable. But Elena's most challenging test was yet to come. Her growing reputation had attracted attention from military observers who wanted to understand the full extent of her capabilities. Plans were already being made for a demonstration that would push her abilities to distances that had never been attempted by any sniper in history. The stage was being set for a shot that would redefine the limits of human precision. The invitation arrived on official letterhead from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, signed by generals and admirals whose names Elena had read in military history books. NATO was organizing the most comprehensive international sniper evaluation in history, bringing together the world's elite marksmen to test the absolute limits of long-range precision shooting. The evaluation would take place at a classified facility in Nevada, where the vast desert landscape provided sight lines extending to distances that had never been attempted in operational settings. Participants would include the highest-ranking sniper specialists from 23 countries, representing the pinnacle of military marksmanship from around the globe. Elena was 20 years old when she received the invitation, already a sergeant in the Colombian Army and holder of multiple international marksmanship records. Her operational assignments had taken her to 4 continents, and her techniques were being studied at military academies throughout the Americas and Europe. But the Nevada evaluation would test abilities that existed only in theory. The letter explained that participants would attempt shots at ranges extending beyond 4,000 meters, distances where atmospheric conditions, Earth rotation, and gravitational effects created variables that challenged the fundamental understanding of ballistic physics. These were distances where a bullet would be in flight for more than 6 seconds, during which time wind conditions could change dramatically. Elena's commanding officer, Colonel Maria Santos, called her into a private meeting to discuss the invitation. Santos had served as Elena's mentor for more than 2 years, guiding her career development and ensuring that her exceptional abilities were utilized appropriately. This is not just another training exercise, Santos explained. NATO is trying to determine whether human beings have reached the absolute limits of precision shooting, or whether further advancement is possible. Your participation could influence military doctrine for decades to come. Elena studied the invitation carefully, noting the technical specifications for the challenges she would face. The longest planned shot was 5,200 meters, more than double her previous record and beyond anything that had ever been attempted under controlled conditions. What do you think? Santos asked. I think it's time to find out what's really possible, Elena replied. Elena spent 6 weeks preparing for the Nevada evaluation. She worked with ballistics experts to calculate theoretical trajectories for ultra-long-range shots, studied meteorological data from the test site to understand typical atmospheric conditions, and practiced with equipment that had been specially modified for extreme distance shooting. Her rifle for the evaluation was a custom-built weapon chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, with a barrel specifically designed for shots beyond 3,000 meters. The scope featured magnification levels that could clearly resolve targets at distances approaching 3 miles. Her ammunition was hand-loaded to specifications that required measuring powder charges to individual kernels. But Elena also prepared mentally for challenges that couldn't be addressed through equipment upgrades. At distances beyond 4,000 meters, traditional marksmanship techniques became inadequate. Wind conditions could change multiple times during a bullet's flight. Temperature variations could affect trajectory in ways that required real-time adjustments. Even the shooter's heartbeat could introduce variations that would cause misses at extreme range. Elena's mental preparation involved meditation techniques that allowed her to slow her heart rate and control her breathing to levels that seemed almost supernatural. She practiced visualization exercises where she imagined bullet trajectories extending across vast distances, accounting for variables that existed only in her mind. The Nevada facility was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Located in a valley surrounded by mountains that rose more than 8,000 feet above sea level, the site offered sightlines that extended to the horizon in multiple directions. Shooting positions were carved into rocky outcroppings that provided stable platforms for extreme precision work. Elena arrived to find herself among the most accomplished marksmen in the world. Participants included the holders of national sniper records from countries including the United States, Britain, Canada, Germany, Australia, and Israel. Several participants had confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, and 2 held previous world records for long-range precision shooting. The evaluation began with baseline tests at distances that were challenging but within the proven capabilities of all participants. Shots at 1,500 to 2,500 meters, designed to establish each participant's technical competency and equipment performance under ideal conditions. Elena performed well in these initial tests, but so did most of the other participants. The real separation would come when distances increased beyond anything that had been attempted before. The first major challenge involved shots at 3,200 meters, further than any confirmed operational kill in military history. At this distance, bullets would be in flight for approximately 4 seconds, during which time wind conditions could vary significantly. Temperature differentials between the firing position and the target could create atmospheric effects that defied precise calculation. Elena was among the first group to attempt the 3,200-meter shots. She spent 20 minutes studying the target area through her scope, noting wind indicators positioned along the bullet's projected flight path. She observed heat waves rising from the desert floor, calculating how they might affect her bullet's trajectory. Elena's first shot struck the target but outside the scoring rings. She worked her bolt action and chambered a fresh round, making mental adjustments based on what she had learned from the first bullet's impact. Her second shot struck closer to the center but still not within the highest scoring zone. Elena closed her eyes and visualized the bullet's path through the air, accounting for every variable she could identify. When she opened her eyes and prepared for her third shot, she felt the familiar calm that preceded her best shooting. This shot struck dead center, earning her the highest score for the 3,200-meter challenge. Most other participants struggled significantly at this distance. Several missed the target entirely, and only 3 others managed to place shots within the scoring rings. Elena's performance established her as a serious contender for the ultimate challenges that lay ahead. The 4,000-meter challenge pushed the participants into entirely theoretical territory. At this distance, bullets would be in flight for more than 5 seconds, traveling through atmospheric conditions that could change dramatically during the projectile's journey. Earth rotation became a significant factor in trajectory calculations, and gravitational effects created variables that required complex mathematical modeling. Elena approached this challenge with a different strategy than she had used for shorter distances. Instead of trying to calculate every variable precisely, she focused on developing an intuitive understanding of the shot that transcended mechanical techniques. She studied the target through her scope for nearly an hour, absorbing information about wind patterns, heat effects, and atmospheric conditions until the entire flight path existed clearly in her mind. When Elena finally took her shot, the process felt more like meditation than marksmanship. She controlled her breathing until her heartbeat was barely perceptible, steadied her rifle with muscle memory that had been developed over thousands of practice shots, and squeezed the trigger with pressure so smooth that the rifle's discharge almost surprised her. The bullet was in flight for 5.3 seconds. During that time, Elena remained perfectly still, tracking its theoretical path through her scope. When the impact occurred, she saw dirt kick up just inches from the center of the target. Elena's near miss at 4,000 meters was closer than any other participant achieved. Most shots at this distance missed the target entirely, and several participants declined to attempt the shot at all, recognizing that their equipment and techniques were inadequate for such extreme ranges. But the ultimate test lay ahead. The final challenge involved a shot at 5,200 meters, a distance that existed beyond all previous human achievement and at the very limits of what ballistics experts considered theoretically possible. At 5,200 meters, a bullet would be in flight for more than 6 seconds. During that time, it would travel through multiple atmospheric layers with different temperature, humidity, and pressure characteristics. Wind conditions could change direction and intensity multiple times during the projectile's journey. The Earth's rotation would deflect the bullet's path by several inches, and gravitational effects would create a trajectory that curved significantly through three-dimensional space. Only 5 participants attempted the 5,200-meter challenge. 3 missed the target completely. 1 participant placed a shot within the target area but far from the center scoring zones. Elena was the final participant to attempt the impossible shot. She had spent the previous day studying meteorological data for the entire region, noting atmospheric patterns that might affect her bullet's 6-second journey through the air. She had consulted with ballistics experts about theoretical calculations that existed only in computer models. But, when Elena finally positioned herself behind her rifle for the ultimate test, she set aside all the technical data and mathematical models. This shot would require her to transcend everything she had learned about marksmanship and operate on pure instinct. Elena spent 45 minutes in position before taking her shot, studying the target area until she felt she understood every atmospheric variable between her position and the distant target. She visualized the bullet's path through the air, imagining how it would respond to wind currents, temperature changes, and gravitational effects during its journey. When Elena finally squeezed the trigger, the entire evaluation facility fell silent. Participants, instructors, and observers watched through spotting scopes and binoculars as the bullet began its impossible journey across more than 3 miles of desert atmosphere. For 6.4 seconds, Elena's bullet traveled through space, climbing and falling through atmospheric layers, pushed and pulled by wind currents that changed direction multiple times during its flight. The projectile experienced gravitational effects that curved its path through 3 dimensions, responding to forces that existed at the very edge of human understanding. When the bullet finally impacted, it struck just 7 inches from the center of the target. The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. Then, the facility erupted in cheers and applause as observers realized they had just witnessed something that redefined the limits of human capability. Elena's shot at 5,200 meters represented the longest precision shot in human history, achieved under controlled conditions that allowed for careful measurement and verification. But, more than just a record, the shot demonstrated that human potential in precision marksmanship extended far beyond what anyone had previously imagined possible. General Robert Harrison, the NATO official in charge of the evaluation, approached Elena as she was cleaning her rifle after the historic shot. "Sergeant Vasquez," Harrison said, congratulations on a truly extraordinary achievement. I've been involved in military marksmanship for more than 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. Elena looked up from her rifle, her expression characteristically calm despite the magnitude of her achievement. Thank you, sir. I have to ask, Harrison continued. How did you know that shot was possible? The ballistics calculations alone should have convinced you it couldn't be done. Elena considered the question seriously. I think the mathematics can only take you so far. Beyond that, you have to trust something deeper than calculations. Harrison nodded, not fully understanding but recognizing that he was in the presence of someone who operated on levels that transcended traditional military training. Elena's performance at the Nevada evaluation established her as not just the world's premier sniper, but as someone who had pushed human capability into entirely new territory. Military academies around the world began studying her techniques, trying to understand how someone could achieve precision that seemed to defy physical laws. But, for Elena, the Nevada evaluation was not an ending. It was a demonstration that human potential in precision shooting extended far beyond anyone's previous imagination. The question now was how those capabilities could be used to protect innocent people and serve the cause of justice. Elena was about to discover that her ultimate test would not involve shooting at targets in a controlled environment, but using her impossible skills in a situation where the stakes were measured in human lives. Elena returned to Colombia as an international celebrity within military circles, but the attention made her uncomfortable. She had never pursued marksmanship for recognition or fame. Her abilities had developed from a desire to protect innocent people, and she preferred assignments that focused on that mission rather than on breaking records or impressing military observers. The assignment that would define Elena's legacy came 18 months after the Nevada evaluation. Intelligence services had identified a terrorist network that was planning coordinated attacks against schools in 3 South American countries. The network was led by a former military officer named Ricardo Mendez, who had been dismissed from service for war crimes and had spent the past decade organizing increasingly sophisticated terrorist operations. Mendez was scheduled to attend a meeting with his operational commanders at a remote facility in the Amazon jungle, where they would finalize plans for attacks that intelligence estimates suggested could kill more than 1,000 children. The meeting was scheduled to take place in a location that was heavily fortified and surrounded by natural barriers that made conventional military assault extremely difficult. Elena was briefed on the situation by a joint task force that included representatives from Colombian, American, and British intelligence services. The terrorist facility was located on a plateau surrounded by dense jungle and steep-sided valleys. Approaching the facility undetected would require crossing terrain that offered little concealment and was actively patrolled by armed guards. The only viable approach for a precision strike was from a mountain ridge that overlooked the terrorist facility from a distance of 7,200 meters, nearly a mile and a half beyond Elena's previous record. At this distance, a bullet would be in flight for more than 8 seconds, during which time it would have to navigate atmospheric conditions that changed dramatically with altitude and terrain. Colonel Santos presented Elena with the mission briefing, emphasizing the extraordinary challenges involved. This distance has never been attempted under operational conditions, Santos explained. The atmospheric variables alone make it theoretically impossible to predict bullet impact with any degree of accuracy. Elena studied the satellite photographs and topographical maps of the target area, noting the terrain features that would affect her bullet's flight path. The shot would require the projectile to travel across 2 valleys and 3 ridge lines, each with different atmospheric conditions. Temperature variations between her firing position and the target could create wind currents that would be impossible to calculate precisely. What's the backup plan if I miss? Elena asked. There is no backup plan, Santos replied. If you miss, those children die. Elena accepted the mission without hesitation, but she spent the next 2 weeks preparing for challenges that existed beyond all previous human experience. She worked with meteorologists to understand the atmospheric patterns typical of the Amazon region during the planned operation window. She consulted with ballistics experts about theoretical trajectories for ultra-extreme range shots. She practiced meditation techniques that would allow her to maintain perfect mental control during a shot that would require nearly 10 seconds of absolute concentration. But Elena also understood that success would ultimately depend on abilities that couldn't be calculated or practiced in advance. This shot would require her to operate at the very limits of human perception and control, trusting instincts that had been developed through years of pushing the boundaries of precision shooting. Elena's insertion into the Amazon was handled by Special Forces troops who specialized in jungle warfare. She was transported by helicopter to a position 25 kilometers from her target, then moved on foot through terrain that was actively hostile to human presence. The jungle was home to predators, poisonous insects, and indigenous groups that viewed any military presence as a threat to their territory. It took Elena 5 days to reach her firing position, moving only during daylight hours when she could navigate the dense jungle safely. She carried her rifle broken down into components, along with enough supplies for a 2-week mission. Her equipment also included climbing gear that would allow her to reach the rocky outcropping that offered the only possible line of sight to the terrorist facility. Elena's final firing position was a narrow ledge on a cliff face that rose nearly 2,000 feet above the jungle floor. The position provided an unobstructed view across the valleys that separated her from the target, but it also exposed her to wind conditions that could vary dramatically with altitude and weather patterns. Elena spent her first day in position studying the target area through her scope, identifying the specific building where intelligence indicated Mendez would conduct his meeting. The terrorist facility was clearly visible through her scope, but the individual buildings appeared as tiny geometric shapes across the vast distance. Elena also spent time studying atmospheric conditions between her position and the target. She observed cloud formations and their movement patterns, noting how they might affect wind conditions during different times of day. She watched birds flying across the valleys, using their flight patterns to understand air currents that her instruments couldn't detect. The terrorist meeting was scheduled for the second day, and Elena's satellite communication device confirmed that all key participants had arrived at the facility during the previous night. Mendez would be meeting with 6 operational commanders to finalize plans for attacks scheduled to begin within 48 hours. Elena's opportunity came at mid-morning, when intelligence sources confirmed that Mendez was conducting an inspection of weapons that had been delivered for the planned attacks. He would be outside the main building for approximately 10 minutes, during which time he would be visible from Elena's position. Elena had been calculating and recalculating the ballistic solution for the 7,200-meter shot since arriving at her position. The mathematics involved were staggering in their complexity. At this distance, the Earth's rotation would deflect her bullet by more than 2 feet. Gravitational effects would cause the projectile to drop nearly 30 feet below a straight-line trajectory. Temperature and humidity variations between her position and the target could affect the bullet's path in ways that required estimation rather than precise calculation. But Elena also understood that mathematical precision was inadequate for a shot of this magnitude. The variables were simply too numerous and too unpredictable to be managed through calculation alone. Success would require her to process atmospheric information intuitively, trusting abilities that had been developed through years of pushing the boundaries of precision shooting. Elena positioned her rifle on a custom rest that she had constructed from rocks and equipment during her first day in position. She adjusted her scope to maximum magnification, bringing the distant terrorist facility into clear focus. Through her scope, she could see individual people moving around the buildings, though they appeared as tiny figures against the vast landscape. Elena began her final preparation routine, controlling her breathing until her heart rate dropped to levels that seemed barely sufficient to sustain life. She visualized the bullet's 8-second journey through space, imagining how it would respond to wind currents, temperature changes, and gravitational effects during its flight across nearly 4.5 miles of atmosphere. When Elena finally spotted Mendez emerging from the main building, she felt the familiar calm that preceded her most important shots. Through her scope, she could see him clearly as he gestured to his subordinates, pointing at weapons and equipment that would soon be used to murder children. Elena made her final calculations, accounting for every variable she could identify and estimating others based on intuitive understanding of atmospheric conditions. She controlled her breathing, steadied her rifle with muscle memory that had been developed through thousands of practice shots, and began the slow, smooth trigger pull that would send her bullet on its impossible journey. The rifle's discharge seemed almost quiet in the vast Amazon landscape. Elena remained perfectly still behind her scope, tracking the bullet's theoretical path through the air. For 8.7 seconds, her projectile traveled through space, climbing and falling through atmospheric layers, pushed and pulled by wind currents that changed multiple times during its flight. Elena watched through her scope as the bullet completed its journey. The impact occurred exactly where she had aimed, and she saw Mendez collapse instantly. The shot had traveled 7,200 meters through complex atmospheric conditions to find its target with perfect precision. Elena's satellite communication device crackled to life within seconds of the impact. Bravo 1, this is Control. Confirmed target status. Control, this is Bravo 1. Target eliminated. Successful engagement at 7,200 meters. There was a long pause before the response came, as if the control center was having difficulty processing the information. Bravo 1, confirmed distance. Did you say 7,200 meters? Confirmed, Control. 7,200 meters. Elena's shot had not only eliminated a terrorist who was planning to murder hundreds of children, but it had also shattered her own previous world record by 2,000 meters. The shot represented the longest confirmed sniper kill in human history, achieved under operational conditions that made the accomplishment even more remarkable. But, for Elena, the distance was less important than the mission accomplished. Intelligence reports confirmed that the terrorist network collapsed within days of Mendez's death, with planned attacks cancelled and operational commanders surrendering to authorities. The children who had been targeted would be safe, and that outcome mattered more than any record. Elena's extraction from the Amazon was completed without incident 3 days later. Her after-action report was classified at the highest levels, but news of her achievement spread quickly through military and intelligence communities around the world. The shot was analyzed and studied by ballistics experts who struggled to understand how such precision was possible at such extreme range. General Harrison, the NATO official who had overseen Elena's evaluation in Nevada, personally traveled to Colombia to debrief her about the Amazon mission. His questions focused not just on the technical aspects of the shot, but on the mental processes that had made such an achievement possible. "How did you know you could make that shot?" Harrison asked. "The ballistic calculations alone suggested it was impossible." Elena considered the question carefully. She had been asked similar questions many times, by reporters, by military officials, by ballistics experts who wanted to understand her techniques. But the true answer was difficult to explain to people who hadn't experienced the absolute focus required for extreme precision shooting. "I think there comes a point where mathematics and equipment reach their limits," Elena finally replied. "Beyond that point, success depends on trusting abilities that can't be calculated or measured. You have to believe that perfect precision is possible, even when logic suggests otherwise." Harrison nodded, recognizing that he was in the presence of someone who had transcended traditional understanding of marksmanship. Elena's achievement in the Amazon represented more than just exceptional shooting. It demonstrated human potential that extended far beyond what anyone had previously thought possible. Elena's reputation following the Amazon mission elevated her to legendary status within military and law enforcement communities worldwide. Her techniques were studied at academies on every continent, and her name was mentioned alongside the greatest marksmen in military history. But Elena remained focused on missions that allowed her to protect innocent people rather than on fame or recognition. She continued serving with the Colombian Army, accepting assignments that utilized her unique abilities to prevent terrorist attacks and eliminate threats to civilian populations. Elena's story became an inspiration to young women around the world who saw in her example proof that deadly precision and moral clarity could coexist. Military academies began actively recruiting female marksmen, recognizing that gender had no bearing on the mental qualities that enabled extreme precision shooting. Years later, when military historians analyzed Elena's career, they focused not just on her record-breaking shots but on her unwavering commitment to using her abilities in service of justice and protection of innocent life. She had redefined what was possible in precision shooting, but, more importantly, she had demonstrated that exceptional abilities carried exceptional responsibilities. Elena Vasquez had grown from an 8-year-old farm girl who watched her father protect their family into a woman whose precision and moral clarity protected children around the world. Her impossible shot across 7,200 meters of Amazon atmosphere had saved hundreds of lives and established her as the greatest marksman in human history. But, for Elena, the true measure of her success was not the distance of her shots or the records she had broken. It was the knowledge that children were safe because she had been willing to push the boundaries of human capability in service of something greater than herself. Elena's legacy would inspire generations of marksmen and women to pursue not just technical excellence, but the moral clarity to use their abilities in defense of those who could not defend themselves. She had proven that the greatest